5 years had passed since the night the forest swallowed Lyra Hollow, and Alpha King Draven Ashgrove still remembered it as the night his heart stopped beating properly. He remembered the smoke rising from the border camps, the screams that carried through the trees, and the empty silence that followed when his warriors returned without her. They told him she was gone. They told him there was nothing left to find. He believed them, because grief does not leave room for questions, and because the woman standing beside him, holding his arm and whispering comfort into his ear, seemed to be the only steady thing left in his world. That woman was Selene Voss. In the weeks after the raid, she became his shadow, his advisor, his comfort. In the months after, she became his Luna. The pack accepted her because the king accepted her, and the king accepted her because he could not remember, not clearly, why he ever should have doubted her. There was a fog that lived behind his eyes those days, a heaviness that made even simple decisions feel like wading through water. He told himself it was morning. He told himself grief simply worked that way. He did not know that every night a cup of moonlight tea sat waiting for him on his bedside table, brewed by Selene's own hand, laced with something old and quiet that dulled the bond a true mate should have felt burning in his chest. He never questioned why the crops on the eastern fields failed 3 seasons in a row. He never questioned why half his treasury seemed to vanish into accounts he could not trace. He never questioned why his warriors, once fiercely loyal to the Ashgrove line, now looked at Selene with a kind of nervous deference more suited to fear than respect. He was a king who had stopped asking questions, because the answers, whenever they came close to the surface, made his skull ache and his thoughts scatter like startled birds. Far away, in the depths of a forest few dared to name, Lyra Hollow had not died. She had been found half-buried beneath fallen branches by a woman named Old Maren, one of the sacred wolves, an order the packs of the kingdom spoke of only in old stories. The sacred wolves lived apart from politics and crowns. They protected the old bloodlines, the ones from before the packs had kings and queens, back when leadership was earned through blood truth rather than born through birthright. Maren had felt something strange pulling her toward the wreckage of the raid that night, something like a call she could not explain. When she found Lyra, barely breathing, she recognized the mark hidden beneath the torn collar of her dress. It was the sign of the first Luna's line, thought extinguished centuries ago. Lyra spent the first year in silence, her body healing slower than her spirit. She dreamed of Draven's face nearly every night, dreamed of the bond she had felt so clearly before the raid, and woke each morning to the quiet ache of its absence. The sacred wolves did not rush her. They let her grieve, let her rage, let her ask why over and over into the dark. It was Maren who eventually sat beside her by the fire and told her the truth of what she was. "You are not simply his mate," Maren said. "You are something older. You carry the blood that once called every wolf in this land to a single purpose, before crowns divided us into smaller and smaller pieces. The bond you feel is real, but it is not the whole of you." Lyra did not believe her at first. She had spent her whole life thinking of herself as an ordinary wolf who had been lucky, or unlucky, enough to be chosen by an alpha king. But the sacred wolves began to teach her things her own family had hidden from her, rites and histories long buried, and slowly her body began to answer calls she never knew she could make. She learned to sense the old wards buried beneath ancient trees. She learned to call wolves who had never met her, and watch them come anyway, drawn by something in her blood they could not name. She learned that her scars, the ones from the raid, had not weakened her. They had cracked open a door. By the 3rd year, she no longer dreamed only of Draven. She dreamed of what her bloodline had been meant to do, and what it could still do, if she let it. Word of the Eastern Pack's troubles reached the sacred wolves slowly, carried by traveling wolves who spoke of a kingdom growing thin and brittle under a Luna. Nobody quite trusted, but nobody dared to challenge. Lyra listened to these stories with a controlled stillness that worried Maren more than any outburst could have. "She is not going back to beg for her place," Maren said one evening to the eldest of the sacred wolves. "She is going back to take it." The elder wolf, a scarred gray giant named Fenric, only nodded. "Then we go with her. Not as escorts, as what we are." The morning Lyra left the Whisperwood, the forest seemed to hold its breath. She walked at the front of nearly 200 sacred wolves, warriors who had not set foot beyond their borders in generations, their banners bearing a crest so old Most modern packs had forgotten its meaning. She did not walk like a woman returning from tragedy. She walked like the answer to a question the kingdom had been too afraid to ask. In Blackthorn territory, Draven Ashgrove felt something shift in his chest, 3 days before anyone told him what was coming. It began as a low hum beneath his ribs, faint enough that he mistook it for exhaustion. By the second day, it had become an ache, sharp and insistent, like something long asleep trying to wake. Celine noticed the change in him, the way his eyes seemed to focus more clearly, the way his hands trembled faintly around his teacup, before he set it down untouched. She brewed the tea stronger that night. It did not help. On the third day, the ancient wards along the northern border, wards so old that even the pack elders had forgotten their exact purpose, began to hum audibly, a low, resonant tone that could be felt in the ground itself. Every wolf in the territory stopped what they were doing at once, ears raised, hearts pounding with an instinct none of them could explain. Draven stood on the balcony of his hall and watched the tree line, and somehow, before anyone announced it, before any scout came running, he knew. She's alive. The sacred wolves emerged from the forest just after midday, their formation precise, their silence heavier than any war cry could have been. At their center walked Lyra, dressed simply, carrying no crown, no jewels, nothing but the quiet authority of someone who no longer needed to prove she belonged anywhere. The pack gathered in the courtyard in stunned rows, murmurs rising and falling like wind through grass. Draven descended the steps of the hall so quickly he nearly stumbled, and when his eyes found hers across the courtyard, the fog that had lived behind his mind for 5 years, finally, fully lifted. The bond slammed into place with a force that nearly buckled his knees. 5 years of buried instinct crashing forward all at once, and he understood, with sickening clarity, everything he had been made to forget. Celine appeared at the top of the steps only moments later, her composure cracking at the edges as she took in the sight below. For a heartbeat, something like fear flickered across her face before she smoothed it into practiced outrage. "This is treason," she called out, her voice carrying across the courtyard. An army marching into Blackthorn lands unannounced, led by a wolf who should be dead. "Guards, seize her." No guard moved. The pack's eyes were fixed not on Celine, but on the ancient wards still humming faintly in the air, and on the woman standing calm and unshaken before them. "I am not the one who should explain myself," Lyra said, her voice steady, carrying easily without needing to shout. "I think that duty belongs to you, Celine." Celine's laugh came out thin and strained. "I don't know what delusions the forest has filled your head with, but I am the Luna of this pack, chosen and bonded." "She has never been bonded to me," Draven said quietly, cutting through her words like a blade. The pack turned to him in shock, but his eyes never left Lyra, not once, not truly. "I felt nothing when I stood beside her. I told myself it was grief. I was wrong." Celine's mask slipped further, fury bleeding through the practiced calm. "You dare embarrass me in front of the entire pack over some forest fantasy." Fenric stepped forward then, his voice low and even, carrying the weight of certainty rather than anger. "We do not deal in fantasy. The sacred wolves protect the old bloodlines, and Lyra Hollow carries the blood of the first Luna herself. The wards of this land recognized her the moment she crossed into these borders. They do not sing for pretenders." A ripple of astonishment moved through the gathered pack. Old wolves who remembered stories their grandmothers used to tell exchanged glances heavy with dawning understanding. Celine, sensing the ground shifting beneath her, played her final card. "Then let us settle this the old way. I invoke blood challenge for the title of Luna. Let the pack see who truly deserves this place." A tense silence followed. Draven's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, Lyra raised a hand, calm and unhurried. "I accept no challenge from a thief," she said. "You did not earn your place beside him. You built it on a lie. I have proof of every piece of it, gathered patiently over 5 years by wolves loyal to nothing but the truth." At her nod, 2 of the sacred wolves stepped forward, laying out scrolls and sealed letters before the assembled pack elders. Reports of the raid 5 years ago, altered in Celine's own handwriting, to erase any trace of a survivor. Records of treasury gold quietly diverted into accounts bearing her family's seal. Testimonies, gathered secretly over years, of sentries paid to look away, and healers paid to stay silent. The courtyard fell utterly silent as the elders read through the evidence, their expressions shifting from confusion to horror to cold, unforgiving clarity. Celine's protests grew louder and more desperate, but no one moved to support her. One by one, the guards who had once stood ready to seize Lyra on her command now stepped back, distancing themselves from a Luna whose power had just crumbled to dust in front of everyone she had once commanded. It was Lyra who spoke the final words, not Draven. "Celine Voss, by the authority of my bloodline and the witness of this pack, you are stripped of your title and your place here. You will be taken to the Whisperwood, the same forest you left me to die in, and you will learn what it means to survive on nothing but what the land allows you." Celine's screams of protest were carried away as she was led from the courtyard, her 5 years of careful manipulation unraveling into nothing in the space of a single afternoon. Draven turned to Lyra then, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The bond between them pulsed steady and true, undeniable now, impossible to silence again. He sank to one knee in front of the entire pack, something an Alpha King had never done before in the history of Blackthorn's line. "I failed you," he said, his voice rough with 5 years of buried guilt. "I let the fog take me, and I never fought hard enough to see past it. I do not expect you to simply return to my side because the bond says we belong together. I expect nothing. I only ask for the chance to earn what I let slip away." Lyra looked down at him for a long moment, the courtyard silent around them, waiting. She thought of the years spent learning who she truly was, the strength she had built from nothing but grief and forest silence, the wolves who had traveled with her not out of duty, but out of belief in what she represented. She was no longer only Draven's mate. She was the matriarch the sacred wolves had waited generations to find. "I am not the woman who was taken from you 5 years ago," she said finally. "I have my own pack now, my own purpose. If we rebuild this bond, it will not be as it was before. It will be as equals, or it will not be at all." Draven rose slowly, meeting her eyes without flinching. "Then let it be as equals," he said, "however long that takes." Lyra allowed herself, for the first time in 5 years, a small and genuine smile. The sacred wolves settled into the Blackthorn lands in the days that followed, not as conquerors, but as guardians of a bloodline finally restored to its rightful place. The wards along the border sang softly every evening now, as though the land itself was pleased. Draven spent the following months proving himself, in ways no crown could demand of him, through patience, through humility, through the slow and careful work of rebuilding trust, one honest day at a time. Lyra did not rush toward forgiveness, but she did not close the door on it either. She ruled beside the sacred wolves as their matriarch, and slowly, quietly, she allowed Draven back into her life, not as a king who assumed her loyalty, but as a man learning, finally, to deserve it. The pack that had once been fooled by careful lies now stood stronger for having seen the truth laid bare, and the bond between their true Luna and their king, tested by loss and betrayal, grew back not as it had been before, but as something steadier, something earned, something neither of them would ever again take for granted.